Hello, welcome to the course on geography. This is the lecture on the course of geomorphology for the MA MSc students for JYOTI VIDYAPEETH Women's University. Okay, in this lecture, we will discuss about the concept of uniformitarianism. Okay, uniformitarianism is one of the important concepts in geomorphology, and we will discuss that. Uniformitarianism is the doctrine suggesting that Earth's geologic processes acted in the same manner and with essentially the same intensity in the past as they do in the present, and that such uniformity is sufficient to account for all geologic changes. This principle is fundamental to geologic thinking and underlies the whole development of science of geology. Okay, so basically, when we try to define uniformitarianism, the concept of uniformitarianism, it's one of the most important unifying concepts in the geosciences. This concept was developed in the late 1700s, which suggests that catastrophic processes were not responsible for the landforms that existed on the Earth's surface. This idea was dramatically opposed to the idea of that time period, which were based on a biblical interpretation of the history of the earth. Instead, the theory or the concept of uniformitarianism suggested that landscape developed or the landscapes developed over long periods through a variety of slow geologic and geomorphic processes. The term uniformitarianism was first used in 1832 by William Whewell, a University of Cambridge scholar, to present an alternative explanation for the origin of the earth. The prevailing view at that time was that earth was created through supernatural means and had been affected by a series of catastrophic events such as biblical flood, and this theory was called as catastrophism. We'll discuss that later. The ideas behind uniformitarianism originated with the work of Scottish geologist James Hutton in 1785. James Hutton presented at the meetings of the Royal Society of Edinburgh that the earth had a long history and that this history could be interpreted in terms of processes currently observed. For example, he suggested that deep soil profiles were formed by the weathering of bedrock over thousands of years ago. Over thousands of years. He also suggested that supernatural theories were not needed to explain the geologic history of the Earth. Hutton's ideas did not gain major support of the scientific community until the work of Sir Charles Lyell, who later explained the princ- in who explained the concept of uniformitarianism in his book Principles of Geology. Okay, so the theory of uniformitarianism was also important in shaping the development of ideas in other disciplines. The works of Charles Darwin and Alfred Wallace on the origin of the Earth species extended the ideas of uniformitarianism. So basically, uniformitarianism, the principle of uniformitarianism says that present is the key to the past. This principle had a profound impact on the science of geology. The principle of uniformitarianism is essential to understanding Earth's history. Okay, like I said, that idea of catastrophism was eventually challenged based on the observations and studies of James Hutton and Charles Lyell. Uh, in their observations, like in the observations of James Hutton, who became convinced that natural processes such as mountain building and erosion occurred slowly over time through geologic forces that have been at work since Earth first formed. He eventually turned his observations and ideas into what became known as the principle of uniformitarianism. Uh, so, uniformitarianism, which is also known as doctrine of uniformity or the uniformitarian principle, is the assumption that the same natural laws and processes that operate today in the present day scientific observations have always operated in the universe in the past and apply everywhere in the universe. It refers to invariance in uh, in the metaphysical principle underpinning science, such as constancy of cause and effect through space time. In geology, uniformitarianism has included the gradualistic concept that the present is the key to the past, and the geological events occur at the same rate now as they have always done. So present is the key to the past is an important concept in this, which means that through present we can understand the about the past. So uniformitarianism is basically the assumption that the natural processes which have occurred in the geological past apply to this day as well as to the future. So uniformitarianism is the concept that natural geological processes which occur today have occurred at approximately the same rate and intensity as they have in the distant past and will continue to do so in the future. Okay, so James Hutton came up with this idea in the 1700s. The present is the key to the past is an important principle in it. He called this the principle of uniformitarianism. It is that if we can understand a geological process now and we find evidence that the same processes in the past have occurred, then we can assume that the processes operated the same way in the past. That is the concept of present is the key to the past given by James Hutton makes us understand that in order to understand the past, we can get the information through the present, and these things are interrelated. These two periods are interrelated, and according to Hutton, geological processes were active with the same intensity during each period of geological time. Hutton believed in the orderliness of nature and was the first geologist to observe cyclic nature of Earth's history. He also said that no vestige of a beginning and no prospect of an end. He gave these quotes about the concept of uniformitarianism. Okay, so basically, uniformitarianism is a geological theory that describes the processes shaping the earth and the universe. It states that changes in the Earth's crust throughout history have resulted from the action of uniform, continuous processes that are still occurring today. In the mid 17th century, biblical scholar and archbishop James Ussher determined that the earth had been created in the year 4004 BC. Just over a century later, James Hutton, known as the father of geology, suggested that the earth was much older and that processes occurring in the past were the same as those that had operated in the past and that will operate in the future. This concept became known as uniformitarianism and can be summarized by the phrase the present is the key to the past. It was a direct rejection of the prevalent theory of the time, that is catastrophism, which held that only violent disasters could modify the surface of the earth. Today, we hold uniformitarianism to be true and know that great disasters such as earthquakes, asteroids, volcanoes, and floods are part of the regular cycle of the Earth. The Earth is estimated to be approximately 4.55 billion years old, and the planet has certainly had enough time for abrupt as well as slow, continuous processes to mold and shape the Earth, including the tectonic movement of the continents around the globe. So, when we talk about the evolution of the uniformitarianism theory, we discussed about two major scientists in the advancement from catastrophism towards uniformitarianism, where the James Hutton and Charles Lyell. James Hutton was a Scottish geologist, and Charles Lyell was a British lawyer turned geologist. So James Hutton based his theory on the slow natural processes that he observed on the landscape. He realized that if given enough time, a stream could carve a valley, ice could erode rock, sediment could accumulate and form new landforms, and he speculated that millions of years would have required to shape the earth into its contemporary form. And Charles Lyell also contributed in this theory through his book Principles of Geology, and he popularized the concept of uniformitarianism. Okay, so the name uniformitarianism itself comes from William Whewell, who coined the term in his review of Lyell's work. On a practical level, uniformitarianism hinges upon the belief that both long term patterns and short term natural disasters reoccur throughout the course of history, and for that reason, we can look to the present to see what has happened in the past. The rain from a storm slowly erodes the soil. Wind moves sand in the Sahara Desert, for example. Floods change the course of a river. Volcanic eruptions and earthquakes suddenly displace land masses, and in what occurs today, uniformitarianism unlocks the keys to the past and the future. So basically, uniformitarianism, if we conclude this topic, that the current geological processes are the same as those at work in the past. So, uniformitarianism is a theory based on the work of James Hutton and made popular by Charles Lyell in the 19th century. And this theory states that the forces and processes observable at the Earth's surface are the same that have shaped Earth's landscape throughout natural history. The Earth sculpting processes alluded to above are the processes of erosion, deposition, compaction, and uplift. Although these processes are constant, they occur at extremely slow rates. Hutton realized that the rates of erosion were slow, that it would uh, take an inconceivable amount of time to observe drastic changes in the Earth's landscape. So the theory also states that these processes have occurred at constant rates throughout natural history, and James Hutton explains this idea in his book uh, entitled Theory of the Earth. And he says that we find no vestige of a beginning, no prospect of an end, and Hutton was the first scientist to conclude that age of the earth must be so incredibly old that the mind cannot begin to estimate its length. Okay, so this is the like basic facts about the concept of uniformitarianism and how James Hutton gave his concept about this. So the expression of uniformitarianism has passed into history because the argument between catastrophists and uniformitarians has largely died. So geology has helped in understanding this concept, and Hutton has provided his concept, his views regarding the cyclic nature of the Earth's history, regarding the slow processes of the Earth's history. So that is basically the crux of this topic. In order to understand that, we can understand the past by studying the present. That's why he said that present is the key to the past. To understand the past, we can assume, we can get information from the present so that we can understand what has happened in the past. And uniformitarianism was opposed to the concept of catastrophism, which believed the sudden origin of things, but uniformitarianism believed that things take place in evolution. It is a slow process which takes millions of years. So that is basically the crux of this topic that was given by James Hutton, the concept of uniformitarianism. Okay, thank you.